Welcome back, everyone. This is Bill. I'm that expat prepper that lives in the Philippines. I thought I would take a moment to try to explain some of the things that I've recently been learning about, and by no means am I an expert. So, last week before the Iran 300 missile launch towards Israel, I was seeing that a lot of EAM, which are emergency action messages, were going out. And I got this from another prepping channel. Now, these are messages sent by the U.S. military chain of command to all nuclear assets. My understanding, this is both subs, planes, and ground. Sky King and Sky Master are the call signs that rule them all, but you'll see various call signs that are crazy as Mess Kit, Straw Dog, and a bunch of other things. Now, these are how they're communicating the encoded messages back and forth. This system's been set up for a long time. Um, I think you guys should go out and do a little research on EAM, but anybody can listen in on these messages, and you would think, well, that doesn't make sense. But it does, because if satellites are down, if normal chain of communication is gone, and then it's just hard to have encrypted radios and codes. So these are messages that are sent and can be sent globally. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But these messages are sent, um, and you might see 12 in a day because sometimes they're used to reposition assets. You might tell a nuclear submarine to move from one location to another as part of its daily thing. So you'd expect to see some of this traffic. What's absurd is when you start seeing 100 a day, 200 a day, and that's exactly what we've seen twice now. The week or the 2 days before the Iran attack, and then just today. Now, DEFCON readiness is something we've all heard about, and this is how the American military defines what state they are. We've been in four for quite a long time, but typically it's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Where one is we're at war or we're about to be at war. DEFCON 2 is when it gets super, super scary. It's only happened once that I can see from my understanding is that during the Cuban Missile Crisis. So even 9/11 only put us at DEFCON 3. So it's one of those things you want to stop and consider, when you're looking at things in totality. So looking at the local DEFCON levels, listening to the EAMs are a perfect start. Now we are at DEFCON level 3 right now, and this is um, I don't know. It seems like in the last year it bounces between 4 and 3 pretty regular. Some people said we are at DEFCON 2. The public's not being told. I don't know. I'm going to go with the public information I get. So you have to take it into your mind what's the current DEFCON level, how many EAM messages are going out, um, what flights are in the air, what's the current readiness status of our military bases, and you have to come to your own conclusion. Now, fortunately, in today's world, you can get a lot of this stuff pretty free. So, like I said, this morning we were at DEFCON 3, over 100 EAM messages, and then at the same time, all of the American bases were set to uh, force protection condition Charlie, which is pretty serious, right? So when all the bases are on Charlie, it's basically locked down. You need a reason and an ID to get on base, and this is all bases, right? So when you go into um, protection condition Charlie, it's a pretty serious issue. So you have to start looking at things in totality. You got the bases going on very high alert. You got a DEFCON level 3. You got EAMs going out like mad. And then you have other things. You have other preppers talking about it, right? So the uptick in other preppers like Nate over at Canadian Prepping, Greg over at New York Prepping, Lee, um, at KLW News, I believe. And let me show you an example of what these sites look like and what the alert sounds like. So I have three different sites I'm going to show you some clips of. Now, all three of these sites, and sorry for the noise, they cover several different things. They'll cover what flights are in the air, what news is being covered. In this case, the missile attack alert level that you're seeing in Ukraine there in the red. So these codes that you're hearing that's not actual activation codes or anything. These codes are typically a direction like an index card, right? So the military asset will take this code, look it up in their playbook, and then have a full set of instructions on what they're supposed to do.
Training a real world, and the aircraft answers real world.
Another example of another guy. This is KLW World News. Now, I like looking at several sites, and the reason I do this is because I can see if it's a replay or if it's live.
I'm with you, Command. I'm with you. Okay.
Now, I know that was confusing, but I wanted you to hear what those alerts sound like. Now, at the same time, I use flight tracking data, and I can look at some of these things. Like in this particular case, call sign con K97. It's a Boeing ECB Mercury, and it came out of Travis, and it's out there doing loops after loops on the West Coast. You'll see this same thing on the East Coast. You'll see sometimes down in the Gulf, and sometimes it's straight lines across the United States. Now, what these EB6 Mercury planes really are is they're the command and control planes, right? So these are the ones that are actually broadcasting this message, receiving these messages. You typically have a high level person on the plane giving directions. These guys have all the codes. They know where all the assets are. And when you see them doing loops like this off the coast, they do a lot of different things, but they're also scanning. So you can do a search on the Boeing E6 Mercury, which replaced their older versions of the command and control planes. I forgot what they were called. But these are the planes that you see in all the movies. These are ones that have, a crew and staff on board with the radars, the SATCOMs, the code books. These are the guys you want to watch, because when these guys are in the air, especially when you see 6 or 7 of them in the air, then you got to really want to start wondering what's going on. Now, you'd think, why is their transponder on? I'll tell you, sometimes they're on and then they turn them off, and then they reappear somewhere else. Sometimes they just reappear out of nowhere. You don't even know when they took off, and I'll show you that in a second. And it's interesting because we tracked a lot of refueling planes that were flying around too, right? So, like in this particular case here, you can see that this jet just popped on. You don't see the blue line of what it was doing, right? So it flew out there, turned on its transponder, and then started broadcasting for a short little time. Now, the other thing that's interesting is you can do this all around the world. So what I'll look at is, I especially before the Iran attack on Israel, I watched just for commercial traffic, right? I was looking to see, is there the airport's open? Is there a lot of commercial traffic, going over Iran and Iraq and Jordan and Israel? So a lot of times the military will shut down commercial traffic prior to attacks as well. So you got to look at that stuff, and you got to think about it. So again, I am by far no expert on any of this stuff, but a lot of people probably aren't even tracking this stuff. I tell you, when I watched this before the Iran attack on Israel, it was very telling. And then this morning we saw more activity than even before that attack. So either the U.S. or somebody got some credible information that an attack was coming, or they felt the threat level was high enough that they decided to go ahead and spin up all these planes. Keep in mind, this costs money. And at the same time, I took a peek over at the UK, and they had probably 20 different fighter jets. This is just an example of one, but they have a different symbol that were out and flying around as well. And like I said, they had some Stratford refueling planes head west out of England at the same time, who ended up off the west coast of South Africa, surprisingly, and then they went offline. So whenever you have large bombers and a lot of jets in the air, they're going to need refueled. So when you're seeing refueling planes going up, and then you're seeing escort jets going up, and you're seeing these command and control planes going up, you want to kind of keep your eye on what's going on. And it gets kind of spooky when you have your allies doing the same thing, right? So, normally EAM messages might not broadcast worldwide, but apparently from what I heard, the EAM messages were being broadcast in Europe as well as the Americas continent. And it's something, again, I'm learning more and more about daily. And if you're a prepper, and you're worried about World War III among all the other things like climate and inflation and natural disasters, a good tell of when a major conflict is about to happen is monitoring this kind of stuff. Now, keep in mind, I don't monitor it 24/7. My anxiety is hard enough as it is. But what I do look at is some of the channels that monitor this stuff. That's their life. These guys know what these mean. They know what the planes are. They track all this stuff and do a good job. I like to pull up my own information so I can validate that what they're sharing is actually real time, not a replay. And I like to see what they're doing is also matching what other channels are doing. YouTube's a business, and sometimes there's a lot of um, disinformation out there. So keep that in a grain of salt. I'm just trying to show you if you're a prepper and you haven't followed any of this kind of stuff, it's kind of neat to do. I mean, I have an RF1 hacker one, and I might start listening to this stuff myself, but my anxiety is already high enough as it is. I think I'm just going to keep monitoring a few YouTube channels. Now, you can also monitor marine vessel traffic, both commercial and in this case, military. Now, again, these are only the ships that have their transponders on. But it's interesting because you can look and see where assets are located. Especially in my interest is the um, area around the Philippines and Taiwan, right? I want to see what the Chinese Coast Guard is doing, the Philippine Coast Guard, the Taiwan Coast Guard, et cetera, et cetera. And I understand that this is only the data that they want to share. I get the fact that war games, war times, these transponders go up and down like a yo-yo, but it adds another piece to the pie, right? So I can start putting together a whole picture of what's going on at any given time. Now, again, with technology, there's a lot of other things we can do. We can start drawing lines and connecting dots when everything's moving in advance. Now, as fast as we like to think it does, it takes time. I think it's like 8 hours from the U.S. to the Middle East if we want to do a bombing run. Our planes can certainly do it, but they don't just show up. So when you start seeing, 1,000 messages, you want to start thinking about what's coming in 8 hours from now. You want to take some good look around and see what assets are out there. And one of the best ways I found to see what's going on is I'll look at a point of interest. I'll go pull up their live webcams, right? You can see a lot of places. Like if I'm thinking Kiev is going to be hit by something, I can pull up Kiev's live webcams. They're out there for the viewing. You can go out there and see what's going on real time as well. And this is pretty much true for Israel and Tehran and just about anywhere you want, there's a webcam nowadays that you can probably find a feed for. So you can start taking all of these things together and start getting an idea of what you need to do personally. And right now, what I need to do is I need to just focus on my preps and monitor. And I'm dying to see what happens in the next 24 hours because that was a lot of EAM messages and they're still going on as I'm making this video, to be honest with you. I don't know anything about it. Why don't you guys pipe in down below? I've heard that they don't do exercises on the frequencies that are used for AIM. I even heard one of the call signs ask if it was real world or exercise, and somebody responded back that it was real world. Maybe they couldn't believe it. Then as soon as someone responded back real world, that same um, call sign requested a verification, which they can do. They wanted to verify that the person making those messages were who they were. So it's not just someone can broadcast and say, "Hey, here's some random code, go do it." So I don't know what the messages mean. It's typically daily. You might see somebody being moved around, a nuclear sub being put on alert in one particular spot for one thing. From my understanding, you don't see hundreds and hundreds of EAMs going out like they were. Typically, when you start hearing Sky Master and Sky King, from my understanding, that's a big deal because that's probably a general giving directions or commands somewhere on one of those planes. And yeah, this is what I've done the last 8 hours is following this particular event. And I didn't know if all the other preppers out there understand this stuff, and I thought I'd share. So please comment down below if you follow any of these guys or if you have any knowledge of EAM messages. Maybe tell me your story. And until next time, everyone, again, be safe. Thank you.